Welcome back to Ethical Exits. We're so happy you're here. I'm your host, Hannah Sandmeyer. Today we explore a simple idea that delivered outsized outcomes, that a truly ethical exit can also be the foundation for even greater growth and shared prosperity. My guest is Chris Fredericks, founder and CEO of Empowered Ventures. Before launching Empowered Ventures, Chris was the CFO at TVF, a specialty materials company in Indiana, where he led the company's transition to an employee stock ownership plan, or ESOP, turning employees into owners and giving the founders a values-aligned exit back in 2010. As a finance leader, Chris wanted to build real diversification into the asset base for those new employee owners, protecting their retirement, stability, and future wealth. 10 years later, that vision sparked Empowered Ventures, a diversified employee-owned holding company that scales ownership across multiple businesses while keeping jobs and prosperity local. We break down how ESOPs work, why diversification matters, and how employee ownership can be both a North Star and a growth engine. If you want to see what a regenerative exit really looks like, you're in the right place. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ethical Exits. I am your host, Hannah Sandmeyer, and this is the podcast where we discuss everything ethical, mission-driven M&A. And I'm so excited. This has been an episode we've been planning for a while. Today's guest is Chris Fredericks. He is the founder and CEO of Empowered Ventures, a holding company built on the radical idea that exits don't have to mean endings. Chris really believes that businesses can be a force for good, not just for communities or customers, but for the people who actually make it run. Hallelujah, Chris. His journey started at TVF, which is a specialty materials company based in Indiana. And back in 2010, he led the transition to an employee stock ownership plan, or ESOP, as it's commonly referred to, turning employees into owners and giving the founder a graceful, values-aligned exit. That experience changed everything for Chris. Over the next decade, he saw firsthand how ownership transitions not only improve livelihoods, but also company performance. So in 2020, Chris, you took the bold move to launch Empowered Ventures, which is a diversified employee-owned holding company built to grow, acquire, and create lasting wealth and well-being for its employee owners. So today, from his home in Vermont, Chris is proving that employee ownership isn't just a powerful exit strategy, it's also a growth engine, a long-term acquisition strategy that scales impact, stability, and shared prosperity. Because the best exits don't just extract, they empower. So welcome to Ethical Exits, Chris.
Hannah, thank you so much. What a great intro.
Well, I like I said, we've been planning this. So I think the first time I learned about you, actually, Chris, was from this book, From Founder to Future, by John Abrams. And this was one of those where I could not, I think my highlighter like ran out of ink. I was just going through it, and like every other page, I just found a tremendous information in this book. If you've not read this book, I've talked about it several times. We had John Abrams on the show. It is definitely, I think, a manual to understand the nature of the options that you have and what cool things people are doing in space. And when I came across you guys on page 92, I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are doing exactly what I was hoping to find. Oh my God, I would love to be best friends with Chris Fredericks. And I think that's exactly the tone of the message that I sent to you on LinkedIn.
Yep. That was great. And funny story, I didn't know the book until you told me about the book. So, we both learned about something through that process, which was great. And yeah, awesome to be connected with you, Hannah, for sure.
Yeah, very, very good. Well, yeah, I mean, isn't that funny how the world works? Before we dive into the questions and the conversation, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Caitlin Corrigan, who's been part of the Ethical Exits journey since the beginning. She's decided that she's going to move on to new adventures. So I just want to acknowledge that and to express our gratitude and thankfulness for everything that she poured into this project. I think actually this podcast was her idea. So thank you, Caitlin. That has been a tremendous journey, and we wish you all the best in what's next. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so Chris, where we always like to start is with values and with your roots, because I think this is what gives shape to people's stories, right? And I, as raising a young son, I want to know what makes people who they are, so I can, in my own way, ingest those memories and those moments in his upbringing to create a really lovely human. And you're certainly one of those who's living out values that I really admire. But if you can talk about that, about what the values are that have guided you most deeply, what would you just say are your core values, what you really care about that really builds out your character and has it brought you to the life you're living now? And so not only what are they, but why? Like what happened in your life, Chris, that brought you to this person that you are and who the leadership that you're providing in the community?
Well, that's a great question, a lovely question. And yeah, I think, core values and values is one of those things that for myself anyway, have learned more about in reflection than I have. Like, I've not always been able to say, this is my, core values that I'm living by. But in hindsight, a lot of things can become clear that matter to us. And so I've definitely put a lot of thought to that. But so I'll get my brief story that I think informs that question is that I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad and his siblings owned and ran and still do a construction company in Indiana, general contractor and roofing business, and also had a side business of a manufacturing company that makes pallets. So I grew up, and my dad and the family I grew up in really, believed in the traditional hard work kind of values. So my dad put me to work at a very young age ish, being a family member, he could do that. And so, I think my first official job that wasn't a chore was going to the pallet manufacturing company and like sweeping the floors, after school and when I was in like middle school. And so, and then after that, I'd work in the family business some. And what's really in hindsight was interesting to me about this experience was I got the opportunity as the son of one of the owners of the business to kind of interact with all of the employees. But from this weird perspective, which is like, I could feel and tell that my life I was benefiting from the efforts of all these people. Because my family was benefiting from all the work of, not that we were over benefiting, like I'm not saying that, but I just did have some sense of like the difference there in that relationship. And also the name of the business is Fredericks Incorporated. So like literally my last name is the name of the business. And so that I was very aware of that. And I don't even know if I realized it until later. But the other thing that struck me about this experience was I did really observe in my dad and the family that runs this company, a care for the employees. That like, for example, during the 2008, 2009 recession, a construction company, they made a huge effort to lay off nobody. There was not a single layoff in that entire company during that process. And that struck me, even as a kid at that point. And they also did other things like bring full coverage health insurance at a point when not all their competitors were doing that. There's a sense of care there. More importantly than that, though, was I observed in the workers a pride of work and being proud of working for this company. So like the flip side of it was really striking to me. Like why did they care and take pride in this work when they don't own it? And they love to get together for like a summer party every year, and they treated me really fun. Like they teased me because I was the owner's son, but I could tell they liked me and respected me too. So it was just an interesting dynamic to learn. And ultimately, long story short, to answer your question, I think what I took from all that is a sense of the dignity that work can provide. Even in a situation like that, where they weren't employee owners of the business, working in that company and building their careers there did infuse some amount of dignity into their work that they expressed. They wanted to wear the sweatshirt that said Fredericks on it, and they were proud of that. And it's like, wow, that's really interesting. So I think ultimately my career has become about that, just helping ensure that whatever I'm a part of, I do my best to help ensure that the dignity that work can provide and support and encourage people to embrace their own dignity, that work is a great tool for that.
That is amazing. We had a guest on, Chris, his name was also Chris Michael from EOT Advisors, and he talked a lot about dignity. He grew up, he told us a story on the podcast how he grew up. His parents were always talking about workers' rights around the dinner table, right? They were good hippies, they were good boomers. And he's dedicated his life to providing people with dignity, treating them with dignity. So I think that's such a beautiful story. And for you to witness that as a child, and I can see how, as a kid, these are adults walking around you, like there's a natural power imbalance, but it was different for you.
Yeah.
And I could see how that it's so beautiful that you can acknowledge that, like you said, like in reflection. I think that's a really, really powerful story, and it definitely helps me understand, and hopefully our audience understand the work that you're doing now. I mean, I can see the direct throughput there. So one of the things that really struck me, Chris, when I reached out and I spoke to you and I asked you, I said, so what's the North Star for you, Chris? Like, what are you trying to do? And I think there's this really beautiful sentiment about profit for purpose companies, that it's philanthropy. It's about really scaling philanthropy. That's the model. That's how we're using capitalism, right? Not to sell things, but to solve problems, to solve real world problems, right? And I think what you said there was really beautiful. You said, well, our North Star is to create life-changing financial and personal well-being outcomes for every single employee. I was like, damn, man. I mean, that's it. And like, what a thing to chase, especially in light of, I was just on a webinar between B Lab, the organization that runs B Corp certification and represents those companies, and the National Center for Employee Ownership, Natalie Rittman-White from Piton, and also John Abrams was on that call, which is really cool, talking about employee ownership structures. And Timothy Garbinski, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, from the National Center of Employee Ownership, shared at the opening of this webinar that I thought was really powerful. He asked the audience what they thought the median dollar amount is in U.S. retirement savings, right? And I guess like 30K. I thought that was like for the median. There's some people that have everything, and then some people have nothing, and some people have something. But what's your guess on that, Chris? I'll ask you. What would you guess it is?
The median of I honestly probably would have said
dollar amount, yeah,
75,000 or something. I don't know why, but that seems that, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm thinking
based
average,
on what? Based
probably,
on the seat that you're
honestly.
with.
I'm probably thinking
Yes.
average, but median
Yeah. Yeah. So the answer is zero.
The median is zero.
$0.
Huh.
The median is zero. There's so many people that have everything, but there's also so many more that have absolutely nothing, right?
Wow.
So that really hit home for me about the importance of this, because we're so interconnected. This is obviously this is not sustainable. This is not a healthy economic model, right? People can't eat with their vibes, and they can't pay their mortgage with vibes either. So when we have disruption like we do right now in our current system, where people are going without paychecks, they can't miss a single paycheck. They have nothing. They have nothing to rely on.
Right.
And not a lot of people can also just go to their parents and ask for for a bump, right? So that really, getting back to like your North Star and what you're working on, if you can just explain to us a little bit, Chris, for some folks that are brand new to the space, have never heard of what a holding company is, don't know what an ESOP is, but if you can maybe start there, like with some basics, in general terms, and then talk to us maybe a little bit about why you chose this model and how is that delivering this outcome in practice for you?
Yeah. Great. So yeah, I'll cover a couple terms real quick. So we're an ESOP, so that's an employee stock ownership plan. There's a few other types of employee ownership out there, co-ops and EOTs being the two other big ones probably. But so we're an ESOP, and we're 100% ESOP, and the ESOP itself is a retirement plan. It's kind of like a 401k plan that owns the company, owns the holding company, Empowered Ventures. So then the Empowered Ventures holding company owns multiple businesses, separate businesses and real estate, some other assets. So we have 5 operating businesses that all all the employees, all the workers of all of our companies participate in the single ESOP at the top of the holding company. So they receive an
Amazing.
annual benefit in the form of shares of Empowered Ventures stock. And that's the form in which they receive, this employee ownership benefit on an annual basis. ESOPs are a very common, structure in the U.S. For employee owned companies. Something like 6,500, private small company type ESOPs. Not many are structured like us. There's definitely some which have kind of diversification and multiple different businesses. That's really what our business is today. Going back to 2010, as you mentioned in the intro, we started as a single company ESOP. And the reason I was the CFO at that time, and the reason we formed the ESOP initially, was to buy out the founding business owner. So a very traditional path into becoming an ESOP. And then for 10 years, we kind of operated that single company successfully. And then in 2020, we decided to roll out this holding company model built on and with the existing company TVF that started this whole thing. It's still very much like the cornerstone business of what we're doing. So we like this model because, for one, most ESOPs are extremely successful. The data, NCO does a great job with the data showing that employee-owned companies in general, and ESOPs being where a lot of the data is, generally outperform, others in their markets. They have less issues with business failure, have better, compensation, better financial outcomes. And we've experienced that as well. So we like this model because even though all those things are awesome about ESOPs, there's a risk. Most ESOPs are single company, and there's theoretically a chance a company could fail. And for me personally, it'd be kind of my worst nightmare if we built up a lot of value in our ESOP and a lot of people come to depend on that value for their livelihood, their retirement, their financial security. And then if something were to happen, tariffs, war, whatever, that's outside our control of as company leaders and workers, it'd be pretty sad if an entire ESOP company kind of comes crumbling down. I hate to say it, but there's one example in Vermont recently. A very famous employee-owned company, Gardner Supply, recently went out of business, an ESOP company, where everybody who still had value in the ESOP lost all of that value. It's a very rare thing for that to happen, but it can. That's what scares me about it. So the idea of building up real diversification, and there's lots of ways to diversify. So that's a whole other conversation. The way we're doing it to buy and build a portfolio of operating companies is one way. And so we believe that there's benefit there. We also think there's benefits of community in a holding company structure. So a lot of companies become employee owned, and they're kind of the first few years, it's like, what does this mean? Like, it takes a while to kind of figure it out, and they have to go to the conferences and like talk to people. And after about years 3, 4, 5, it starts to click into place. Like, oh, this is what employee ownership means for our company.
Big firm expertise, values-driven impact. At Impact GC, we've traded the traditional law firm playbook for one built on purpose and trust. As a certified B Corp, member of the 1% for the planet, and certified carbon neutral law firm by We Are Neutral, we help mission-driven businesses grow, protect their purpose, and lead with confidence. We're here to make the complex simple and the work human. Let's build what matters. Visit impactgclaw.com to learn more.
By being part of a holding company structure, when we've brought new company and new populations of workers into our group, we can kind of onboard them into employee ownership more quickly. There's ways to kind of plug in, and leaders connect, workers connect, create a shared sense of committees and understanding of what they're part of. And it's a rinse and repeat a little bit. It's never rinse and repeat, but you kind of develop a capability around that. And we have found it definitely can bring people into that sense of ownership mindset more quickly than maybe a single transaction ESOP can.
Very cool. Michael, the guy I was talking about from EOT Advisors, he described when New Belgium became an ESOP.
Mm.
They bring everybody in. I'm curious if this is how you do it, Chris, because the companies that you buy, they become 100% employee owned the next day, or like when that transaction goes through, is it immediate?
Immediate.
Yeah.
When we go in and then we announce, they are immediately have joined our ESOP, correct?
That's amazing. I imagine that these conversations are pretty fun. I would think of it as like Christmas, for a lot of these workers, and really dramatic, like these scenes that go from like, oh my God, we got acquired, where they're afraid, right? To like these really joyous, maybe celebrations that break out where people are like, what? Like they still need to know what this means. But
Yeah.
Chris Michael was describing when New Belgium became an ESOP, they brought everybody in dramatically into their brewing room, like concrete floors, metal chairs, what have you. And they told everybody, we've been acquired, and everyone was freaked out. And they want to know who bought the company. And they said, well, there's a yellow envelope under your chairs. You know this story, Chris?
I kind of remember. I want to hear the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so cool, right? It's like, this is like made for TV, right? It's like definitely a documentary. And I think it has been a couple times. But they asked the team to reach under their chair. There was a yellow envelope, I believe, that had, contained who the owners were. And when they dramatically, all the employees, chairs scraping on the seam, on the concrete floor, the whole nine, reaching under, pulling out this envelope and opening them dramatically. And inside was a mirror. Right?
That's cool.
I think cool, right? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with acquisition strategies is that part in the middle, right? The buy, sell, negotiation, all that due diligence, of course, takes a long time. It's very complicated, but the actual implementation of that new ownership, the new ownership structure, and all the FUD, all the fear and uncertainty and doubt that employees have of like, what does this mean? And if they may have friends, or maybe they've been acquired before, and this is typically not a good thing, right? Or there's some disruption coming on down the pipe that might result in them losing their jobs because of this transaction. They're seen as duplicative in a lot of instances. So I can see how these transitions, while still exciting, nerve-wracking, can also have questions. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. It can provide a quick solve for some of those transition problems. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah. So much to respond to there, in a good sense, for sure. We've found that, when we come in and a company joins us, the initial reaction generally is that confusion and like, okay, this is like cool, but like it's confusing. And also, is this too good to be true? There's like a skepticism, which I think helps you.
Sure.
But they're not terrified, like a common, feeling maybe from a buyout, that maybe some other type of buyer comes in and as an employee, like, I've never heard anything good come out of what I'm being told right now. So, definitely much better reaction. And so what we have found is people are curious and they want to understand more, and then they stick around. They want to see what this is really about.
Yes.
So then there's like follow-on meetings to talk and like educate and really have it be a discussion. But then we're very open about kind of, this isn't a lottery ticket. Like it's going to take longevity. You have to stay, and like, you'll year after year, you'll build value, but it really takes a commitment to, build those shares over time. And then after it inevitably is true that after a few years, people just start to get really excited, as both the experience of first off, we I guess kind of stepping back to your question, we're also very careful when we come in, because we don't want to come in and just immediately start saying we know what's best for this company and start making a bunch of changes. So it's really important to us to say there's something special about this company, and that's why why we wanted to join our group, and we're going to do no harm. Number one, we're going to do our best to do no harm. There's some amount of integration, of course, or combination or whatever, that always takes place with an acquisition. But we kind of have that as our North Star for that particular process. And we find that that's really, really important. And we communicate that clearly. And kind of tied with that too is our strategy as we build out and diversify is, that each company continues to operate independently. Like me, myself, and our team at the holding company level, we are not involved in day-to-day operations at our businesses.
Yeah.
That's not to say we're not involved. We definitely are plugged in and, working with people in our companies, but we are not, dictating day to day, how things need to go.
Yeah.
In fact, we're trying very much to empower our leaders and our workers to continue
Amazing.
to make sure their companies are successful. So that tends to play out really nicely, that as they're gaining an understanding of what they're now part of, and as they experience that what we said is true, that we're not actually coming in and changing things for the worse, that it tends to come together really well.
Amazing. Yeah, I can see that in very quick succession, and maybe before even talking about the ESOP structure, just like talking openly about what you're optimizing for.
Yeah.
Right. And you're optimizing for dignity and to empower them. That is powerful. I can see how that could cause a collective sigh of relief and intrigue. Like you said, like, well, tell me more. I'm not going to ditch. There's enough here that I want to learn. And then, as you talked about earlier with the holding company, that you have a really unique opportunity then to have employees talk to other employees, right? You basically have a built-in cadre of ambassadors, right? Who can tell it, that from their side of the story or from their perspective. So they don't need to hear it from you, right? This doesn't have to be top down. This is middle up, bottom up, all ways, right? And I can see how that can be extremely reassuring for folks, is when they talk to someone that looks like them and does the same work that they've been doing for their entire life, and they can talk to somebody who maybe his financial future has dramatically been impacted to the positive through these transactions. So that's super helpful. You mentioned that, and of course, there are other employee ownership models, right? You mentioned them. There's worker-owned cooperatives. There's the ESOP that you've chosen. There's employee ownership trust. There's perpetual purpose trust, right? Are I think the four things that we see most commonly, especially in the United States, or that are becoming more and more popular, the popular models. So maybe explain to us a little bit more about why the ESOP over these other structures for your strategy. And there are trade-offs, right? I mean, there are some pretty significant differences between how an EOT works, for instance, versus an ESOP. So what trade-offs do you accept, and where does the ESOP outperform for your goals?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I totally agree. I think all forms are awesome. I think there are trade-offs.
Yeah.
I think all forms can work in a holding company structure very well. So it's definitely not that there's one right answer for acquisitive, employee-owned companies either. I think they all can work extremely well. We chose ESOP initially without even knowing co-ops or EOTs exist, just to be honest. I didn't even know about ESOPs initially. Right. So we were exploring, we're recommended ESOP by our accounting firm. And I do think ESOPs tend to be the default answer to the challenge we had, which was a pretty straightforward succession challenge in a pretty traditional business. The business owner at the time, a little bit top down, built this business himself, liked the idea of the workers all benefiting from, being employee owned. But frankly, he wasn't motivated by a super egalitarian, perspective. It was a little more of a practical, I like the way this will kind of preserve this business for the long term and keep it off of the private equity getting sold. Like, for a lot of business owners, I think that's a big priority that leads to an ESOP path, because ESOPs tend to be more perpetual. So we got on the ESOP path there, plus the financial benefits, of course. There's tax benefits to being an ESOP that are kind of hard to beat if you're just purely looking at it from a company finances lens: lending, borrowing, investing, taxes, etc. It's a pretty powerful incentive that the US has created for ESOPs. So we started from there. Now, zooming forward to today, I think of it more, if someone asks me what's the right model, it should be a combination of looking at the trade-offs from a financial perspective with kind of the vision for the business in terms of governance, like, what's truly this population of workers, what's going to help them truly embrace an employee ownership mindset and make for sustainable, business for the long term that's going to continually benefit and the workers through this employee ownership model. And I think there are trade-offs, like, for example, in a co-op model, one worker, one vote, one share, one vote kind of thing. Yeah. It's a very democratic model, which is powerful, right? Very powerful model.
Yes.
Also, we all experience that democracy takes a lot of work, and you have to have really, really, let's say, civic-minded people that can kind of hold a lot of these trade-offs in their mind and emotionally manage themselves and not use democracy as a way to kind of take something a wrong direction, let's say. So I just think there's like a high standard of governance that co-ops introduce can be extremely amazing and frankly just like inspiring when it's working well. ESOPs are a little easier, frankly. It's like we can bring on large groups of people, and we don't have to have everybody have a super high standard of this kind of governance mindset quickly. Like we're able to acquire and then maybe tailor the adoption of an ownership culture to the speed that the culture, the population of people can actually embrace it without requiring too much work right up front. Like we don't have to invest dozens and dozens and dozens of hours up front to kind of get them up to speed on governance type stuff as soon as possible.
Yeah.
It can be a slower burn kind of process. So that's just a couple of things. I think there's a lot of different ways to look at these trade-offs. And again, it's just, it's fun almost to think through every situation though, and identify like what's the most exciting ownership path for a particular company.
Yeah, I definitely think too, for an inquisitive employee ownership model, to your point, because of the immense tax benefits, ESOPs throw off a lot of cash, right? I mean, if the aggregate tax rate is between 20 and 30%, I don't know if that's fair or not, but that's a number I think about. That's a lot. That could be a lot of money to either reinvest back into the company, to reinvest back in the jobs that you're creating, and the quality of jobs you're creating, benefits, all of that is really tremendous. But also just having the cash flow to acquire, right? That helps.
Yeah,
helps a lot.
There's a healthy debate to be had to your point. The ESOPs, really the primary mechanism is they're creating equity value for workers versus co-ops and EOTs. They're more generating, let's call it dividend streams, annual payments, usually in terms of that's where the benefit comes from. And I think that's a healthy kind of debate to have is like, do people need more money now, or do we want to build equity value for them because that creates security and wealth for the long term? Both are good. I don't think there's any question. Both are really good. But it's the kind of trade-off you have to think through, I think.
Well, and I think that there's still pathways to do both. I mean, you can still give cash dividends, profit sharing at the end of the year. In an ESOP, you don't just have to always put it in the, something that they can only gain access to when they leave the company, which is something to think about and has gotten folks in trouble. They get a little top heavy. And I know that's a constant rebalancing of like, how do we make sure we have enough cash on hand to fulfill our commitments, right? As the company grows in value. So yeah, I mean, it is very interesting. I think the point is well made. It's not easy. I would say there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's a lot of customization in many of the models. If you're interested in this, definitely talking to an advisor, whether that be people who focus on particular models might be interesting, or talking to more of a generalist. I think the National Center for Employee Ownership does a really good job. In a lot of ways, they provide a lot of good material. We became a member after you recommended them, which was really great ourselves. And we've enjoyed interacting with them, but also groups like Project Equity, I think, do a good job, or there's also state centers. So lots of resources out there for you to explore it, lots of different ways to cut that. But I think pursuing it definitely is of value, one way or another. Pick your model. um, okay, moving on a little bit in the holding company, particularly this example is really exciting, and using it acquisitively for growth is, of course, of high interest, because we know there's been people talking about this in lots of different ways, but the silver tsunami, and that there's so many companies, 3 million, I think, is estimated in the US alone, to transition or close, and only 20% of founders actually sell their business, founder-held businesses, which is devastating in its own. But in the next 5 to 20 years, 3 million of them, that's 32 million jobs and $127 trillion in value transfer. Wild, right? Like, this is one of the biggest events we will have ever seen in wealth transfer, and where it goes is important. And who owns these companies moving forward are making ownership transitions possible for a lot of founders who maybe don't see pathways moving forward. So we've talked a little bit about value coming from building up rather than building out in your holding company model. So I'm curious what your decision rule is for a new platform versus an add-on. And I think you said you keep these brands separate, right? Versus then integrate them into one company, if that's correct. So yeah, if you can talk a little bit about that, because you've had some experience now. I think you have 5 companies you said that you've acquired.
Yeah, we now have 5 separate platform companies. Call them platforms. They're not all necessarily roll up plays, meaning adding more companies to each specific one, but 5 separate operating companies. And then we've also done 2 add-on acquisitions over the course of our history to 2 of those companies. And we will continue to look at doing add-ons for some of our companies as well. So yeah, I think, building out and creating more diversification comes from building out and adding businesses in really separate, industries, geographies, whatever, characteristics you want to look at. Business model, diversification, even within one industry can be a benefit. So, diversifying for us has been a key part of all of this. So that was why we built out. And what we're really looking for when we've purchased a new business and a business in a new industry for us is a stable industry, first and foremost, not buying something that's in an industry that's likely to be extremely challenged. So we try to use our crystal ball there. And then beyond that, it's
no AI companies for you, Chris.
Well,
no AI tech plays.
I mean, I think there's definitely going to be a lot of that, but yeah, that's definitely a different subject. So in terms of those businesses, what we're really looking for is stability, not crazy, uncertain futures, and some sort of we like to see something about the business that is special. And what I mean by that is there's something about that particular group of people that does something really unique in that marketplace and is really valued by certain customers. And not all companies actually fit that bill entirely. I mean, all companies do provide services and products, but have they really figured out something that can't be found very easily from a competitor or, whatever. And that could just be something as simple as the level of quality that the entire company's culture kind of expects or demands. That could be an example, or it could be some sort of innovative approach or whatever that just only that company can provide. So we really like to feel like there's something special about that company that is there. And the other thing we like to see is back to kind of my original story, I guess, is this pride of work, meaning the people who work there, not just the business owner, the people who work there are proud to work there. We think that's like the perfect foundation for worker ownership, is when that's already in place. I don't necessarily think it's easy to take a group of people who aren't proud of where they work and turn that into a worker ownership mindset. I think it can be done. It's just that's a different kind of lift that we probably shy away from at this point.
Sure, at this point, but it'd be very noble. right?
Very noble, a
To
turnaround
bring this
kind of
model.
mindset, to bring and help companies
Yeah.
become thriving would be extremely noble. Maybe it's just not my skill set at this stage, but maybe in the future.
Ladies, it's time we talk about what happens when the women who keep everything running behind the scenes finally take ownership. You're ready for more control, more impact, but staying where you are won't get you where you want to go, and starting from scratch feels way too risky. So, what if there's a third way? At Our Way, our women's acquisition entrepreneur ecosystem, we help women buy established, cash flowing businesses instead of building from zero. When women take ownership, companies grow stronger and communities thrive. That's just smart economics. Learn more at ourway.com.
Maybe in the future, right? You never know. You never know who's on your team or who you will acquire onto your team that's really passionate and very good at that, right?
Yep,
I could see that
absolutely.
being a really lovely extension, but yes, hard work, right?
Yeah.
Hard work. So, and also you have to balance that against protecting the collective,
Exactly.
right? As you said, everybody rolls up to the top, so you have to be, really do your due diligence. So that's really interesting. So when you say that, I think about if I were in your shoes, looking at companies, probably companies that have high reoccurring revenue are attractive. So really sticky clients that have stayed around for a long time, and then retention rates for the employees being high. People have been there for 10, 20 years, right? Work their way up. You can also see maybe this person started on the shop floor and now is the vice president. You probably would like that kind of trajectory or story that you can read without having to speak to the employees. Because I know in these transactions, sellers are pretty protective, right? You don't have a lot of access to their staff, because certainly they don't want this to get out most often that they're selling the business. So is that kind of how you assess those intangibles as you just? Okay.
That's exactly how we do it. I will add though, we really, really like to find situations where the business owners are willing to let us talk to some people and the customers. And we find ways to kind of build that into our due diligence process. It's always at the end. When it comes to customers, we actually have a way of kind of having it be more of a customer service experience call from a consultant who's doing it for the company, and the company will benefit from it no matter what happens. So there's a way to do that, and it still get accomplished kind of what we're looking for. But yeah, being able to talk to some of the key employees is pretty essential for us. We've never done a deal where we haven't had some amount of interaction with some of the employees.
Fantastic. Okay. Excellent. That's super helpful. Thinking more about the sellers and their succession or their mindset. I noted that earlier that only 20% of founders actually sell their business, 80% close, which is just devastating in so many different ways. So it's just a heartbreak. And that, I think a lot of it, there's a lot of different reasons for that, but just many sellers just lack a succession plan, or they wait too long, or they're in a position where it's really hard for them to be looked at as a viable asset to buy. And one of the things that I understand that Empowered Ventures does, which I think is wonderful, and again gets back to what you're trying to do, what you're optimizing for. So you offer, and correct me if I'm wrong, a 2 to 3 year transition. And also for that founding seller, so they can hang out for a little while, and you probably learn so much from them as they do. And then you're looking to also to aim to elevate internal leaders first, which again gets back to the sentiment of like, we're not here to tell you how to do your jobs. You obviously know how to do them, and you're just empowering people. You're showing up and providing that sense of dignity. That is what you're doing. But if you could talk about like a little bit about what that on-ramp looks like day to day, and how do you keep the culture expansive rather than extractive?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we have found that our combination of employee ownership plus long-term orientation plus a willingness to work with the seller is a good set of kind of compelling reasons for some sellers to consider us. Some sellers do a great job of their succession planning, and usually a company like that, they probably already are going to do an ESOP or something on their own, which is awesome. Like, go get more power to you. That's great. But so we're kind of solving maybe for a different situation, which you're alluding to, which is a business owner that maybe isn't quite on top of their full succession process. But they're feeling that they're close to that end. They're a year, 2 years out, and they're feeling ready. We view that process as long as they're committed to staying that 1 to 3 years, you're comfortable taking some risk there, which is commonly discouraged, I would say, in the M&A industry, to not take that kind of risk. But we're comfortable for a couple of reasons. One, we've already done a lot of work to align, ensure we have some values alignment with this business owner. Like they're selling to us because they truly care about this business. They're not wanting to just walk away with a pile of cash. One of our business owners, for example, he literally said a dozen or 2 dozen times as part of the process, my name is on the company. I'm not gonna just leave it, high and dry.
Sure.
So we bank on that.
Like your company, Fredericks.
Yeah, it was very, very similar. And then we also, count on the fact that the employees are going to stick around more than likely, even if we have the worst case scenario is a leader exits too quickly and a lot of key employees exit too quickly. That's when an M&A transaction can go very badly. So at least we're kind of protecting ourselves on both of those fronts. That gives us the ability to have a patient process for the business owner. And that's really beneficial to them. In that process, we're able to work with them to identify internal people and it's not even about saying who's the next leader. It's saying what's the potential of the people that are there, and let's make sure we're able to create conditions where they can fulfill their personal potential. Because having some number of them are probably going to need to step up for this business to continue to grow and succeed. And they want to. They've probably been waiting to some degree for someone to come along and say, how much further do you want to take your career? Not all business owners have time to do that kind of career pathing with all their folks. So, we find that that's a really great opportunity we can bring to a culture, to a team, is to kind of introduce that conversation in a new way that's really fun for people. But ultimately, we are willing to bring in a leader from the outside. It's just not our preference, as you said. It's definitely much better, much safer for the business and the team to find someone who's already there to step up and lead the company. But we kind of go in with an open mind about kind of what's going to be best for the business.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that in M&A transactions that there's a risk calculation of doing it the way that you're doing it, but the way that you explained it is like, what are you talking about? Seems like Chris would be taking on more risk if he followed that traditional advice.
Yeah, I mean, yes, more risk other than if a buyer's going to come in and say, I'll give you a pile of money and you can leave and I'll take over. There are definitely buyers like that out there. And if that's all the business owner cares about is getting that pile of money and leaving, then, that's their risk calculation. But it may not be what's best for the business.
For too long, selling a company has meant profits for a few and pain for everyone else. It's time for a new model of buying and selling businesses, one built for all stakeholders, on values. Steward Market is that bridge. We're building the marketplace for ethical exits, where founders can sell with confidence, buyers can grow through values-aligned acquisitions, and the ecosystem of funders, CPAs, attorneys, and advisors can collaborate in one transparent hub, connecting every player in the deal-making process around a shared goal, making purpose-driven transactions easier to find, fund, and close. If you believe business transitions can create shared prosperity, not just shareholder value, join us. Sign up for early access at stewardmarket.com and be part of building the next era of impact-driven M&A.
Yes, right. Or for that future buyer, right? Like you said, if then the critical people then also look for the exits, right? I mean, that looks like a company that's maybe not going in the right direction. So I certainly understand that, and I really appreciate that you're actively seeking out and that you understand what this looks like for you when it works out best, based again on what you're optimizing for, right? Which is that long-term, slow, patient growth. And I imagine, Chris, you probably don't come in at the highest multiple in a lot as a bidder on
I
a
don't
lot of these
believe
transactions.
the most. We're always super competitive, very, very
Yeah,
with reason, of course. But I don't believe
sure.
we've ever been high bidder per se. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And that makes sense, right? Okay. Well, thinking about for other companies that are maybe considering this, right, for ESOPs or other employee ownership models, it's becoming more and more popular. And I know that the NCEO, the National Center for Employee Ownership, for the first time ever, will at their national conference next year in Milwaukee in April, will have an M&A track, right,
Mm.
explicitly talking about acquisition strategies because their founder over there, and I believe you shared this with me as well, has seen that like this is the fastest way that employee ownership grows is through
Yeah.
acquisition. Overnight, what you're doing, and you're buying companies with hundreds of employees potentially, all of those employees become employee owners. That's much faster than building a company and doing that step by step, year by year. So if you're in a position to advise a company that's maybe considering doing this, whether they're just mission driven, they're patient capital, they're more values driven, or they are an employee ownership model that wants to build a holding company, you've learned a lot, obviously, through the time you've been doing it and through the different transactions. What is the playbook that you wish you had on day one?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of mistakes made. The types of things that turn into playbooks are usually the mistakes that are made. So yeah, I think first and foremost, just talking to people who are doing it. I wish I
Mm,
would have had more
mm,
access to other
mm.
employee-owned companies that were doing it back then. I did end up connecting with one or two, but I didn't do. I could have done more research, but it wasn't easy to find folks either that were doing
Yeah,
this kind of work. So starting there, ultimately, playbook I think builds best from a real strategy. So taking your time to
mm,
identify what's the real strategy that fits your company, your business, your organization. There are some I think that get intrigued by the idea of growth through acquisition, but it's just kind of like scattershot a little bit because you don't know where to start and you
mm,
like the idea of it, but how does it really connect with your current mission and purpose? And how does it ultimately help
mm-hmm.
you further your actual purpose and mission? I think is a great way to start and get
Yep.
really clear about that because there are so
Mm-hmm.
many different playbooks in terms of types of strategies, roll ups or verticals or horizontals or diversification or
Yeah,
acquihires or all kinds of different reasons to do acquisitions. So in what problem is it going to solve for you, and how does it help you
exactly.
further your mission? I think that's 90% of the work up front. Then the actual playbook of
Mm-hmm.
finding and buying companies and integrating them kind of flows pretty naturally from that, even though you'll still want to do a
Mm.
lot of work to kind of iron all that out.
Yeah, amazing. I think that's so true. And I think when you move away from the financial goals or the whatever the fiscal numbers are you're wanting to hit, that
Right.
doesn't really inform your strategy, right? What informs your strategy is why you're doing it and what you're trying to achieve. And if
Yeah.
you can do that from a what you care about from a value standpoint and from your mission standpoint, I think that's where inorganic growth can get really interesting and can be
Yeah.
extremely powerful.
Yeah.
I think that M&A obviously can be a climate justice strategy,
Mhm.
right? And it can be a racial justice strategy. It can be a very powerful vehicle, but understanding why you're doing it will inform the strategy. And then also, as you said, they're talking to folks, building your advisory committee, just as is recommended for the seller,
Yeah.
right? Don't do this alone, right? You'll make way more mistakes than if you just build out a network of trusted advisors. I think is really critical. Folks who have done it before, who can advise you in ways and help you think through things that maybe you never would pick up, right, based on your point of view or your lived experience. So I think that's really valuable. Well, Chris, to close, as mentioned earlier, I think I'm a big believer in the new form of capitalism being a way to scale philanthropy. So everything we do with the podcast and with our principal business Up and Over is it's about solving problems that we care about. So if listeners could support one cause, nonprofit, or an organization that's close to your heart, where would you send them? What would you want them to know about?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. I'm not affiliated at all with this organization. I just kind of think what they do is really cool and it seems super duper impactful. So I don't know if folks have heard about the charity called Give Directly. So it's a charity that gives money to people because money helps people. So they kind of get rid of all this stuff in terms of like, we'll solve this problem or that problem. And they find people, in Africa and in the US and all over the world that need help and they give them money. And of course they do more than that. They help them kind of as much as possible, make good decisions and have a bank account or whatever, like manage their money. So they're trying to help people, utilize, but they don't aggressively control what people spend their money on. And they're also super data oriented. So they try to measure outcomes and they've found some really fascinating things about who's best to give money to and to impact a community. It's usually women. It's mothers and women are the ones that you should give money to, not men. You can probably imagine why.
Sure.
So, it's a really interesting charity. I can't vouch for any individuals or anything, but it's just, I have found that what they're doing is really cool.
I love that. It reminds me, I think that closely follows Mackenzie Scott's philanthropic strategy is again, they find people and they give money and then they don't really offer a lot of wraparound services, right? They just give money and trust, right?
Yeah.
That they'll know what to do with it better than they do, right? Yeah. And I think that's really interesting because it reminds me too that it's the hardest thing you can ever do is help people, and people don't need to be helped; they need to be heard, right? And this law of emergence, right? That if you give people, you empower them, you give them space to make decisions for themselves. Typically, they make really good decisions, and they see things that you don't see. Exactly. So I think that's really wonderful. What a great way to end. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. I'm so glad we were able to do this. I'm so glad to know about you. And I know that we'll stay close and we'll continue to watch your moves. And I know there's going to be more acquisitions coming in the next 12, 24 months, right? As you continue to build up this model. But kudos to everything you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it. I think it's really powerful. And I think you could help a lot of folks that are maybe at the beginning of that journey. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Really appreciate the opportunity.